second event that I would highlight is Prime Minister Hariri's visit to Damascus late last year in December of '09. On one level, there's almost a Shakespearean quality to this visit. For those of you who don't know the full story, Prime Minister Hariri's father was assassinated under somewhat murky circumstances in Syria, in Lebanon, for the son of a well-known leader to go and visit the man whom some associate with his father's murder clearly is fraught and packed with all kinds of emotion. But I also think the visit was very important because it marked a step in mending relations between Lebanon and Syria. It seemed to signal a determination by Prime Minister Hariri to act as the leader of a country rather than the leader of a political party. And in it, I think, is embedded a calculation that a policy of rapprochement with Syria is in Lebanon's best interest. The third event I would highlight is the visit last month of Druze leader Walid Jumblat to Damascus, completing his transformation from one of Syria's most vociferous critics, at one time calling President Assad, among other things, the dictator of Damascus, and placing himself now staunchly in the camp of those who favor some sort of rapprochement with Syria. Jumblat formally pulled out of the March 14th coalition in August, and I would say that move also marked the symbolic, if not actual, demise of that coalition, or certainly its coherence. So what brought about these developments? Here I would say it's Syria's, I almost want to say, phoenix-like rebirth from the depths of 2005, where the regime was concerned for its own survival, to an emergence, as I said before, on the regional and even global stage, which is where I would say it is today. What accounts for this shift? Well, I think the first event to take a look at is the violence in May 2008 and the subsequent Doha agreement. I think that was a watershed event in many, many ways. And we don't have a lot of time. We can talk about it more in the question and answer, but essentially the violence that erupted in May 2008 was the culmination of 18 months of tension between the Sinora government and Hezbollah, and ended with Hezbollah essentially overrunning West Beirut, turning its arms on its fellow Lebanese, and bringing Lebanon to the precipice of civil war. The Doha Agreement brought an end to that violence, paved the way for the new president, Michel Suleiman, to be elected, resulted in a consensus government which, very importantly, ceded to Hezbollah its long-sought-after veto power, a power that it retains, albeit implicitly, today. The second key event, I think, is the rapprochement between Syria and Saudi Arabia. That has had a dramatic impact on events in Lebanon. It has certainly brought, I would say, a measure of calm and stability to Lebanon. These two patrons of the opposing bloc, Saudi of the March 14th bloc, Syria of March 8th, the rapprochement was capped by visits, President Assad to Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah to Damascus. It continues in a gradual way and has helped, I think, to usher Syria back onto the regional stage. I would also note that Egypt now appears to be in the process of a rapprochement with Syria, and maybe we're witnessing, in fact, a realignment amongst the Arab countries. The third point I would note on this one is Syria's enhanced engagement with Europe. And here I would highlight in particular France. Just after Doha in July of 2008, President Sarkozy invited President Assad to attend the Euro-Mediterranean Summit in Paris. And this was kind of Assad's debut, if you will. And Syria's beneficial behavior, shall we say, in Doha was cited as a reason. Sarkozy then visited Damascus shortly after that. We've seen several high-level visits from a number of European dignitaries. And then fourth, we have the U.S. engagement with Syria, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. It's a topic of great debate right now. I would say its roots really began in the very latter part of the Bush administration. It certainly gained steam with the Obama administration. And it's been cited by those in the region as a reason for a turning back to Syria. What does Prime Minister Hariri hope to achieve with this rapprochement? I think it provides a very important opportunity to transform Lebanese-Syrian relations to something more akin to normal state-to-state bilateral ties. There are really 5 specific goals, which in the best of all worlds, if, frankly, any one of these was achieved, it would be terrific, let alone all of them. I would say, I don't know if there's a particular order of importance, but certainly at the top of my list is border demarcation. Demarcation between the borders of Syria and Lebanon, which is a natural next step to establishing diplomatic ties. It's something that the Syrians have professed an interest in doing. Actually doing it is another matter entirely. But it's an area, I think, that's very ripe for engagement, very ripe for involvement, quite frankly, from a number of powers, including our own country. Second is the amendment of the numerous bilateral agreements and treaties that governed ties between Syria and Lebanon during the period of Syrian hegemony in Lebanon in the 1990s. It's essential for these treaties to be amended to reflect the new state of affairs, but also to, I would say, capture the inherent synergies that do exist between these two countries and from which both countries can benefit. The third would be the dissolution of the Syrian-Lebanese Higher Council, which essentially at the time was the primary instrument of control that the Syrians used during the 90s. Right now, because of the fact that these countries have now established diplomatic ties, that body really should be rendered obsolete. The fourth is the issue of disarming Syrian-supported Palestinian factions that are armed but residing outside of the camps. This is an important source of instability in Lebanon. In fact, just this past month, there were clashes between competing factions. Another area in which the Syrians, as well as the Lebanese, express a desire to move forward on. And finally, there's the issue of those Lebanese missing in Syrian prisons. This comes, again, not only from the period of Syrian hegemony in the 90s, but really harkens back to the Civil War as well. Human Rights Watch estimates that there are several hundred Lebanese who are not accounted for. I think this is a crucial element toward, again, turning the page. In terms of how Lebanese actors are responding to this rapprochement, I think, again, in some ways, Walid Jumblat's turn is instructive, and he's sometimes called the weather vane of Lebanese politics. And his move, I think, on one level does show the way in which the wind is blowing. Now, his motivations, I would argue, are largely rooted in his own narrow confessional interests. It's a survival game. And I think really, frankly, once the violence settled down in May of 2008, I would argue that's when Walid Jumblat began rethinking his calculus, and slowly but surely we saw this path toward Syria being made. The most interesting community to look at is really the Christian community in Lebanon, which is, I would say, very much divided on the question of Syria, as it is on many, many questions. I mean, the Christian community of all the confessional communities in Lebanon is in the greatest state of disarray. On the one hand, we have General Aoun, who is in a formal alliance of sorts with Hezbollah, who on his own has made his own peace with Syria, having been one of its most violent enemies. So he, of course, is in favor of this re-engagement, and also himself made, I think, his second trip to Damascus in recent times, this past December. Then we have those Christians who are allied with March 14th, and here, even there, we see some differences.